Bottom line, if you really support social housing, really want it to succeed, then you should vote for 1B. It provides a reasonable amount of money that they can actually get out the door.
I'll say it's a question of whether or not we think that the status quo is working, because what I hear from the opposition is let's just stick with what we're doing and hopefully, I don't know, something from the federal government will come down and bless us.
Well, that's Rachel Smith from the Seattle Metro Chamber supporting 1B, Tiffany McCoy from House Our Neighbors supporting 1A, speaking to me on the Seattle channel. These are the competing social housing propositions you will be seeing very soon, with special election ballots getting mailed out this week in Seattle. What does it mean about the future of voter-approved social housing in our city? Plus, we're getting closer to learning who might fill the vacant District 2 council seat as that list has been whittled down. Plus, our state is already taking action in a lawsuit against President Trump less than 24 hours into his second term. All this and more to consider this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine, and my co-host David Croman is with me once again. David, my gardening friend, I'm having one of those weeks where the daffodils are starting to pop up in my backyard. Is this a sign of the coming apocalypse, or should I just put some mulch on them and maybe get through this cold snap? What do you think?
I think daffodils are smart. They'll and resilient. This is about the time when they usually start coming up. It'll take them a while to flower, but
okay.
I think they'll be fine on their own. I don't think you need to do.
Okay, one of these times it is going to be the apocalypse, man. I'm putting that out there. We got to be prepared for that. David, great to be with you as always. Thank you. Thanks also to City Grind Espresso, the background noise sponsor for the podcast. John, hope you're doing well. Thanks for rocking it on the first floor of City Hall right there. Thanks always to my show patrons. So glad to have Stephen come on board. Stephen is supporting the show at $5 a month. You can too. That gets you access to Patrons First content and other benefits. So please do support the show for $5 a month. Love to have you. Even get one of these snazzy decals. So make sure you jump on board. The show is on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. A big thanks to Converge Media too. The video version of the podcast is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's do this. Time for Right Here, Right Now. Quick note before we start, I'm sorting out some details on a recent story in Publicola about 2 reporters being placed on paid leave. Anna Krieg, Ashley Nurbavig. This is pending an investigation that they did not disclose information they had about former Stranger editor Rich Smith, who had allegedly had a one-time sexual encounter with Alexis Mercedes Rink before she became a council member in November. Rink beat out Tanya Wu in that election. Tanya Wu held a press conference this week calling for more transparency. I'm not sure where this is going yet. I will add that I would consider Hannah, Ashley, and Rich friends and colleagues. I'll definitely keep you posted on this as the news warrants. But I did want to move to our top story of the week, which would be Prop 1A and 1B, part of the three-headed monster of a question on your ballot this February, I should say, in Seattle. It's getting mailed out this week. Three-headed monster, two-headed monster, I don't know. It's just a bit confusing for voters because here it is. Question 1 in this is, do you support either one of these measures, which are plans to fund social housing, which voters approved 2 years ago with I-135? Quick refresher, this is the kind of housing where people making up to 120% of the area median income can buy units. The concept is those paying higher rent subsidize the people making lower income. Then question 2, you have, all right, no matter what you said on the first question, which one do you like? Prop 1A, which is the social housing provider's original plan to tax salaries over $1 million here in Seattle, or Prop 1B, the city and chamber's version, which relies on existing jumpstart tax money and would raise about 1/5 of the amount of the first option. David, I wanted to go through all that background because I think there's a lot to this, and the city council definitely has the right to put competing measures on the ballot when citizen initiatives come forward, but how confused do you think voters are going to be with this measure? That's my basic question here.
Yeah, I'd say quite confused because I think the initial body itself is a little confusing, which is this space that it occupies kind of between, the housing levy and public dollars that way, or Seattle Housing Authority and private developers and public developers, and kind of where this fits into that space. Voters approved it pretty convincingly, but I think kind of what it will actually do is still a little bit of a question mark to sort of your casual viewer. And then here we are sort of talking about how it's actually going to be funded, which I would imagine some people are going to say, hey, didn't I already vote to approve this? Wasn't I approving money? The answer was no, you were just approving its basic creation. And now is the time where it actually needs dollars. And now, of course, there's these 2 different options. I think, the chamber and members of the council have been fairly opposed to the original piece from the start. We've known that, but also, I think the question of should corporations and rich people be taxed to fund housing is going to be a popular one in the city of Seattle, and I
yeah.
think the opponents of it knew that, and so are trying to offer something different. I don't know if it's an explicit tactic to confuse voters or anything like that, but it is, I think, to an extent, an admission that there was a pretty good chance the original one would have passed, and so they are offering, rather than just fight that on its own terms, they are offering a new option that they can live with better.
Yeah, right. That uses an existing tax that the city already brings in, which is Jumpstart. And just to make clear here, folks, the writers of Initiative 135 could not put a funding measure along with that yes/no vote that we had back a couple years ago, because our state says, nope, you can only have one topic on an initiative. That's what has struck down a lot of Tim Eyman initiatives in the past, so they were trying to be careful with that. The plan all along was to bring forth this funding measure, but this is where we are right now. And I just wanted to go down this path with you, David, because as I understand it, if voters reject both of the funding plans, like with that first question, they say, nope, I don't want either one of these, that's not necessarily the end of the social housing developer. They would just have to find a new way to generate funds. And I guess they would go back to the voters at a certain point. That's the part where I think that's going to be a tough one to reason with, if indeed voters say no to both of these things, which you have a number of housing providers saying that would be the right way to vote here.
Yeah, I think at the time of this body's passage in 2023, it had a pretty good chance of getting funding from the city council. I think that would have been an avenue that they would have just gone to council members and, maybe asked for a higher, increase the Jumpstart tax.
Sure, take it out of it. Okay,
Of course, that reality has changed quite significantly since voters have approved it, and this city council is almost certainly not going to vote to fund it in any sort of substantial capacity. And so, I think it's a good question.
And real quick, just to jump in, David, the biggest champion of social housing on the city council was Tammy Morales, who is no longer there. Keep going.
Yeah, exactly. And even she probably would have been alone. I would think that maybe Councilmember Mercedes Rink and possibly a couple others could be convinced to sort of support it in theory, but at a time when, budgets are what they are, and the city council, I think, is skeptical towards it generally. I don't think that's going to be an avenue. And, the supporters of this housing initiative have said as much, that they don't think there's a path to getting funding through this city council. And so, if it fails, then I don't know. I suppose it is just try again later, because otherwise it's largely a symbolic body that will just talk about social housing and not be able to do anything about it.
Yeah, I know the state Olympia delegation ended up getting some money towards this group, but it just gets really, really murky depending on this vote. So that's what I'm concerned about out there.
Right. That is another avenue, is maybe there's some support in the state for it. Again, that means it's not like the state has a bunch of money they're throwing around right now. No. They're in a budget deficit as well. So very interested to see what happens there. Again, look for that ballot coming this week. And if you have any questions about it, write to us, Seattle News, Views, and Brews at gmail.com. Happy to answer any questions there. But I did want to move on because we've been keeping tabs on the latest with the City Council's Position 2 vacancy. Of course, Tammy Morales leaving that position at the beginning of this year. A list of 20 applicants has been narrowed down to 6. That would include Mark Solomon, Chakundi Salisbury, Adonis Ducksworth, Thaddeus Gregory, Edward Lin, and Hong Chuor. David, you wrote about this group, all men of color, some with ties to the city of Seattle already, meaning they work for the city of Seattle. Is there anything that stands out to you with this group? Yeah, there's some sort of vague themes. It's only 6 people, so it's hard to draw too broad a narrative. But, a few of them have land use experience, which I think is reflective of the comprehensive plan being kind of probably the main priority for the city council this year. And this person will have to kind of jump into public safety, or at least sort of, community involvement seems to be a theme for a couple of them. So those are the things that really stand out to me. Mark Solomon.
Real quick, jumping in, Morales was also the chair of the land use committee, so trying to fit somebody into that hole too. Keep going, please.
Though that committee will not really be the lead on the comprehensive plan.
Right. Good point.
And I think there is a bit of city government experience too, which I think perhaps was appealing to folks who, because it's a sharp learning curve to be a city council person. So you've got someone who works in Mayor Harrell's office, city attorney, an assistant city attorney, and Salisbury works in Parks and Rec.
Right.
None of these names are big names, and I don't know that anyone would recognize them right off the bat. Like we talked about before, these aren't retired elected officials sort of coming back to give it one last go. These are most of them are sort of bureaucrats or people who have been toiling in their professions for a while. Mark Solomon is a funny one to me because were he to be appointed, that would mean that the two previous people that Councilmember Tammy Morales beat in an election would be appointed to the city council.
That's I don't think you couldn't say it wasn't personal at that point. I guess
no, exactly.
That'd be interesting. So yeah, I guess I'm trying to look at how the council is approaching this decision too, David, with regard to the constituencies that they're trying to connect with. I think about connecting with Little Saigon and Chinatown. Hong Chuor has a lot of connections there. I think about Chakundi Salisbury, who recently ran and lost in the 37th district, which covers Rainier Valley, southeast Seattle. This is just one of those situations where I feel like council districts can be almost a blessing and a curse because you're trying to find this one person to represent a very diverse part of the city in District 2.
Yeah, that's true. It is the most diverse part of the city. When we look at sort of metrics by which people tend to measure disproportional harms, a lot of them can be applied to this district. You know, most people hit and killed by cars, income levels, things like that tend to land disproportionately on District 2. So, and, I think Chinatown International District is and will continue to be a big focus for the city hall right now because, they're under a lot of pressure from the people, rightfully so, from the people who live there to fix some of the public safety issues, particularly around 12th and Jackson and Little Saigon. I do think that's going to be a pressure point in this upcoming election year for the council people, city attorney, and mayor who are all running again. And so having a representative in that position who can kind of speak for and on behalf of those people and be a representative for those people, I think is going to end up being really important.
I do too, yeah. Tanya Wu was testifying on that this week again before the city council. So certainly something that is on their minds, and we'll see what happens with these candidates. The council is going to make a decision by the 27th, so we'll make sure to follow up with you with regard to that decision. It's right around the corner. All right, up next, which new proposal from President Trump had the state of Washington and more than a dozen other states filing a lawsuit less than 24 hours into President Trump's presidency? We're going to break it down coming up and on. Now hear this. Well, if you listened to President Trump's inauguration address and his comments this week, you heard a lot. His plans to rename the Gulf of Mexico, his assertion China is operating the Panama Canal, and then the claim that U.S. scientists split the atom when, come on, give New Zealand some love here, please. But the executive order that drew a lawsuit from the state of Washington and at least 23 other states as of the middle of this week was this idea that children born in this country would not be automatically granted citizenship. Birthright citizenship, as it is called, it's in the Constitution in the 14th Amendment. The suit was filed in the Western District of Washington, and as Nick Brown, our AG, expressed back on Election Day, other states have been looking to him for guidance in situations like this.
I've learned a lot over the last year as a candidate for Attorney General, how much not only the people of Washington look to this office as a leader, but indeed the entire country. And as I got to know some of my future colleague attorney generals across the country, how much they have looked to Washington for leadership.
I should point out that there is a similar lawsuit in Massachusetts with a group of 19 states on board there. So more than 40 out of the 50 states are not on board with what President Trump has proposed here, that any child born in the U.S. must have at least one parent who is either a U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident to automatically become a U.S. citizen. The order is set to take effect on February 19th. So I was looking at this, David, and A.G. Brown says he's got a strong case. Many other states agree. This is a right guaranteed in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. What do you make of what the president is trying to do here? Is this a distraction? Is this something real? How do you look at this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a test to see what they can get from this Supreme Court, because that's where it will go. They knew that from the start, I'm sure. I think a lot of the executive orders probably, from what I've read, it seems like a lot of them were pretty carefully vetted legally, and a lot of people in Trump's administration had been preparing for basically 4 years for yesterday and to write a lot of these. And I think most of them are written with the intention of actually having the policy implemented in one regard or the other. This one is clearly on its face, intended to draw a court challenge and intended to go to the courts. And I think it's for people like Stephen Miller, sort of a Hail Mary pass to get what he wants, like pretty massive overhaul of how we view immigration, and be able to do it while circumventing Congress and the people that we elect. And so from what I've read, it seems like most legal experts expect you don't see a great path for it because the amendment reads fairly clearly about being born in the United States. But you never know. And I think their hope is that they can find some sympathetic ears on the Supreme Court, which they might, because 3 of the people on the court were appointed by the current president.
Yeah, yeah. Predicting court cases is not a good avocation. I always try to stay away from it because it is difficult to say. But it really does remind me again, David, of our discussion last week. Even if this lawsuit is overturned, it could still have a pretty chilling effect on immigrants in our country, some of whom are already here legally. Do you see that piece of it? Because I think that part of that larger narrative is I think part of the intent of the president too when it comes to immigration and trying to make some of these changes.
Yeah, I agree. I think, right, because that is what stands out about this order is that we're not just talking about undocumented people and the children they have. It's people who are here legally in one respect or the other. And, I think what stands out, there's a lot of conversation around sort of preventing more illegal immigration into the United States, but some of these priorities suggest, an effort to restrict the amount of legal immigration in the United States.
Yeah, wants to do away with the asylum program.
Yeah, exactly. That is a much bigger step beyond just sort of quote securing the border.
Yeah. This really is that first test, I guess. Here, as you put it, it's a really good way to look at it. And I'm thinking about what A.G. Brown said in his press conference back in November. Here, he spent his last 6 months of being Governor Inslee's general counsel, and that was the first 6 months of the first Trump presidency. So it's something that his office has been preparing for a while, and I know a number of other states are looking towards Washington for some leadership here. So we will see what happens next year. I'm sure this will not be the last case from the state AG and the White House. So something to keep an eye on there. But I wanted to keep an eye on another issue in Olympia here, David, a move to cap rent increases making its way through the legislature. So, folks, this is House Bill 1217, which would limit rent and fee increases from landlords to 7% in any 12-month period, while also stopping increases in the first 12 months of a tenant lease. Representative Emily Alvarado, the Democrat from the 34th District in West Seattle, is the prime sponsor on this measure, which she has brought up before. And I'm really hearing, David, some of the same arguments in Olympia. A bill like this would discourage people from becoming landlords and hurt their ability to recoup costs. But then you have renters advocates saying, hey, something has to be done because housing isn't getting built fast enough and people are getting pushed out. More than half the people in the state are renting right now. I just wanted to get your take on this, David. What goes through your mind when you consider a bill like this one that the legislature is dealing with right now? Yeah,
I see it as having a tough road to hoe, but the numbers on the Democratic side have grown, so it probably has better chances. Clear to hurdle today. I think I see it's a tough road to hoe because, it would have to pass pretty much with exclusively Democratic votes, and I don't know that there's unanimity in the Democratic caucus around that either. And if it does pass, I would suspect that it looks something like what maybe Oregon and California have done, which is it's preventing pretty dramatic price hikes and probably would not apply to new construction. So the sorts of things that are there to prevent basically extortion, but not necessarily there as a meaningful way to keep housing cheap for large numbers of people.
Yeah, I keep hearing the argument, at least from some smaller landlords, like this is going to push the smaller landlords out of the market and bring in these larger landlords buying up everything who can maybe sustain this, smaller price hike or whatever else, and they'll just do it through volume. But it would push these smaller mom and pops out of the market. Have you heard that argument as well? I know that circulates sometimes around these.
Yeah, and that's an argument we hear quite a bit. Just for basically any time there's a new proposed regulation.
Yeah, any sort of rent regulation.
For landlords. I don't know how much that has to do with it versus kind of larger. Because it's also just a difficult landscape to build in Washington. And, I will say it has been interesting, actually, that a lot of affordable housing providers, well, I don't know about a lot, some number of affordable housing providers have started to speak out against some of, like, for example, Seattle City Council's tenant regulations, particularly around evictions, and saying basically it's making it really difficult for them to collect on rent and it's hurting their kind of long-term viability. Yeah. That's an interesting shift. And, I do wonder if they're, how far some of this kind of housing conversation will go, and if some of, where the kind of endpoint on it. Because, hearing affordable housing developers who are usually historically seen as sort of liberal on housing
Sure.
policies, kind of speaking out against some of the Seattle stuff, it does, I guess, just how my point being, just housing generally can create interesting bedfellows.
Yeah, I was going to say the same. And any other connections you can see here? Because I know the council is going to be working on the comprehensive plan, kind of its urban growth plan over the next couple months here. And I have heard there will be some work on some of these landlord and tenant issues. How do you see what the state's doing connecting with that? Or where do you see that maybe colliding? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, I think the state is going to be more aggressive on the housing front in some ways, and we've already seen that. I don't think the city, if left to its own devices, would necessarily have gone as far as HB 110 did last year. At least that's the sense that I'm getting from the city council when they talk.
With regard to putting in density, et cetera. Keep going.
Yeah, exactly. And so, what that means as far as from a kind of landlord-tenant regulation and tenant rights and things like that, I don't know, but it feels a bit like this legislature is actually going to the left of the city council, which is not something I thought I would say, just a couple of years ago.
Very interesting to see where that one goes. All right, well, coming up, folks, that traffic you are noticing coming into Seattle could very well be the Amazon effect. We'll see what the numbers are saying and what that's doing to the Seattle commute. That's coming up on What's Next. David, I could not stop smiling after I saw the opening line from your colleague, Nicholas Deshays in the Seattle Times. Alexa, show me a traffic jam. Very, very well played there. He was writing about the impact of a 5-day-a-week in-person mandate for Amazon workers, which has been in place since the start of the year. The Seattle Department of Transportation is saying there's a 5 to 9% increase in traffic compared to last year at this time. Lime bikes and scooters say their usage is up 146% around South Lake Union. And then you have the analytics company, INRIX, saying commute times are up 15 to 20% in Seattle and Bellevue, with 65,000 people heading back to work, 50,000 of them in Seattle alone. David, you were doing some transportation reporting not too long ago, and I'm guessing these numbers don't surprise you too much. What do you make of this?
No, we saw a pretty good bump, a meaningful bump when Amazon first required workers to come back 3 days a week.
Right.
And so, no, it doesn't surprise me that would follow suit when people are made to come back every day. And, when people are made to come back 3 days a week, it doesn't necessarily mean everybody coming the same day, but now you've got the entire workforce coming all at the same time. So, it's not surprising. Seattle's, I think, the biggest company town in the country. It's more office space dedicated per square foot office space dedicated to a single company than any other city in the country. And so what Amazon does makes a difference. I say, as a person who works in South Lake Union or pretty close to South Lake Union, you certainly can feel it. With the 3 days a week, I haven't been in enough to really notice the everyday mandate.
Right.
But, it feels like a full city in South Lake Union, I will say.
Yeah. And I noticed, too, I don't end up heading in to downtown every day, but there are certain days of the week, almost like Tuesday through Thursday, for example. Are those the big hitters for you? What's your personal experience been with that?
Yeah, for sure. When I do commute, occasionally I'll come in on a Friday and it feels pretty dead. Certainly in our offices, I'm usually the only one there if I'm there on a Friday.
All right, fighting the good fight. But just last piece on this. Do you see Amazon's move to require people to be back in the office a full 5 days a week inspiring, pushing other employers to do the same? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I would think yes. It was sort of a reverse of what happened during the pandemic. It was these big companies that shut down their offices first and kind of dominoed away. But at the same time, people have been hoping for some kind of domino effect for a few years now, and it just has not materialized. Those office spaces are just not filling up. I think it probably matters less to smaller companies. But I don't know. Maybe we'll see. I should note, President Trump ordered all federal workers back to the office every day. So, there's some federal offices in downtown Seattle. So there's perhaps some meaningful effect there. But as far as other private companies, I don't know. It'll be interesting.
Yeah. It's just how much that predicates other movement in the market is something I'm definitely going to be taking a look at. All right. Well, we need to wrap up here, David. And in honor of the really snazzy 1997 Mariners sweatshirt you have on there, I thought we'd talk it up again. That's awesome, man. I love that. We're going to talk about it, of course. Ichiro got into the Hall of Fame on the first ballot. the first Japanese player in the Hall of Fame. So much to be proud of, a brilliant career. Combined with his Japanese career, he has more hits than anyone in baseball history. Felix Hernandez, the Mariners pitcher that we love so much, came up short. We're going to keep on pushing for the king. But here's my big question. 400 people vote in this group, the Baseball Writers Association of America. But it was not unanimous for Ichiro. One voter, just one, said, no, not this time. He should probably wait a few ballots. He wasn't really that great. Who is this clown masquerading as a baseball writer? What do you have for me? This is bonkers.
Yeah, I just trying to imagine who was checked on this person's ballot. I have to think they must have just sat it out, or maybe they forgot to return it. I don't know how it works if you don't return your ballot.
Like a 4 out of 5 dentist, like the fifth guy just didn't even vote on which gum was best. Yeah, I don't know.
Because it's the same way, 3 people didn't vote for Ken Griffey Jr.
Yes, right.
Hall of Fame. Like who should be in the Hall of Fame? What is your?
I don't know.
It feels like there's something funky. The only thing I saw is there might be one guy out there who thinks you have to have been in or won a World Series to be in the Hall of Fame. But that's a horrible.
That is horrible. Well, yeah, that would certainly keep Felix Hernandez out. Do you think Felix has a shot later on down the line? I know this is how it commonly works. Guys are on the ballot for years before they actually crack the code.
Yeah, well, Felix is at 20%. Billy Wagner, who was just inducted, started at 10%.
Right.
So, and I think over the next 10 years, a lot of younger writers are going to cycle in and replace the older writers, and Felix is going to be more popular with them just because his underlying numbers are a lot more impressive than kind of the wins losses stuff. So, yeah, I think he's got a good shot. I think it'll be 8, 9, 10 years from now, but I think he's got a good shot.
Last question on this: is there a current Mariners player? I know I'm extrapolating a lot here that you could see in the Hall of Fame later on.
Yeah, I mean, I think Julio has the potential.
Yeah,
he's already. He wasn't great. He wasn't as good last season, but his first 2 seasons were as good as any rookie. So I think he's got it in him.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll see. We only have a few more years to wait on that one on Julio, but we'll see what happens there. And if you ever find out who this baseball writer is, give me a break. I mean, the fact that the one person who caught in with the unanimous vote was Mariano Rivera. Please give me a break. I just can't do it. I can't do it.
Only because he's a Yankee.
Exactly. And I thought that, because Ichiro was a Yankee for a little bit, maybe that, I don't know. Got to play in New York, I guess, to make it on the big squad. Thank you, David. Thanks to everybody listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics and maybe a little baseball, too, every now and then. Thanks again to patrons who support the show. If you're not a patron, please do support the show for just $5 a month on Patreon. Thank you, Stephen, for doing so this month. Much appreciated. You can hear us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you like to listen. And thank you very much for listening. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media. See you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2025.